Sir, you need to leave this property immediately.
Excuse me? I live here. This is my home.
I got a call that you're trespassing. You match the description of a suspicious person.
Suspicious? I am the homeowner. This is my house.
Homeowner or not, you're leaving. I need to see your ID now.
I'm providing ID.
Officer Robert Matthews had been with the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department for 21 years. In those 21 years, he'd accumulated 43 formal complaints. 38 of them involved black people he'd accused of trespassing, breaking and entering, or not belonging at luxury properties in the wealthiest neighborhoods of Washington, D.C. and surrounding areas. A black homeowner entering his Georgetown townhouse was questioned for suspicious entry. A black attorney on his own balcony was told he didn't belong there. A black surgeon unlocking his mansion was detained for attempted burglary. A black CEO in his driveway was investigated for unauthorized vehicle operation of his own car. A black diplomat watering his garden was handcuffed for trespassing on embassy-adjacent property he owned. A black venture capitalist on his own tennis court was arrested for breaking and entering a private recreational facility. Every complaint ended the same way: property records confirming ownership of multi-million-dollar properties, internal review that cleared Matthews, bias training he attended but dismissed, written warnings that accumulated but meant nothing, union protection that blocked any meaningful discipline, and a pattern so extreme it had drawn congressional attention. One Sunday afternoon in Washington, D.C., his 21-year pattern of assuming black people didn't belong in exclusive neighborhoods finally confronted someone who didn't just know the law, someone who interpreted and created it at the federal level, who'd been appointed to the bench by the President of the United States, whose estate was blocks from where Supreme Court justices lived, and whose arrest would trigger a constitutional crisis, congressional hearings, and the largest settlement in D.C. history. That confrontation would end Matthews' career, send him to federal prison, cost the city $21 million, and expose a department that had ignored 43 complaints over 21 years. The Honorable Marcus Washington, a 53-year-old United States District Court judge for the District of Columbia, was standing in his own front yard in the Kalorama neighborhood, inspecting the landscaping work that had just been completed when police cars pulled up with lights flashing and officers emerged with aggressive postures. His judicial robes were hanging in his home office. His appointment letter from the president was framed on his wall. His name was on the deed for the $8.5 million historic mansion. No crime, no trespassing, no violation, just a federal judge examining work on his own property. But Officer Matthews saw him through a lens so warped by racial assumptions that he couldn't process a black man at a palatial estate as the legitimate owner, certainly not as a federal judge whose decisions shaped American law, and definitely not as someone whose arrest would become a landmark case in civil rights jurisprudence. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Hit that subscribe button. These stories expose the truth. Washington, D.C. Kalorama, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in America where ambassadors, cabinet members, Supreme Court justices, and former presidents lived behind gates and security. Judge Washington's mansion was a stunning Beaux-Arts estate built in 1912, fully restored with 10,000 square feet, a private courtyard, and historic significance. He'd purchased it 5 years ago for $8.5 million after his appointment to the federal bench. It was 3 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon, temperature 68 dawn, beautiful fall weather. The tree-lined street was quiet with the extreme privacy that defined Kalorama. Secret Service vehicles occasionally passed, protecting high-ranking officials who lived nearby. The Honorable Marcus Washington had been on the federal bench for 5 years, appointed by the president and confirmed by the U.S. Senate after a distinguished career as a civil rights attorney and law professor. He'd graduated from Yale Law School, clerked for a Supreme Court justice, spent 15 years as a partner at a major law firm handling constitutional law cases, then taught at Harvard Law School for 8 years before his appointment to the federal bench. As a district court judge, he presided over cases involving constitutional rights, federal criminal law, and civil disputes. His opinions were frequently cited by appellate courts. He'd written landmark decisions on voting rights, police accountability, and civil liberties. He earned $246,600 annually as a federal judge, a significant pay cut from his private practice earnings of over $2 million annually, but he'd made the choice to serve. He'd purchased his Kalorama mansion 5 years ago for $8.5 million using savings from his years in private practice. He'd meticulously restored the historic property, working with preservation experts. He knew his neighbors, ambassadors, senators, cabinet secretaries. He'd hosted judicial conferences at his home. He'd never had any issues in the neighborhood until today. That afternoon, Judge Washington had been reviewing case files in his study when he heard landscapers finishing work on his front garden. He'd hired a high-end landscaping company to restore the historic plantings. He stepped outside in casual clothes, khaki pants, and a polo shirt to inspect the completed work, walking through his front yard examining the new plantings, when he heard sirens and saw multiple police cars pulling up fast. Do you think officers should verify property ownership before confronting homeowners? Drop your answer below. Officer Robert Matthews had those 43 complaints over 21 years. 38 involved black people at luxury properties in exclusive D.C. neighborhoods. A pattern so extreme, so well documented, so publicly known, that it had been the subject of a Washington Post investigative series, that members of Congress had written letters demanding his termination, that the D.C. Attorney General had launched an investigation, that civil rights organizations had filed a federal pattern and practice complaint, and that Internal Affairs had labeled him a constitutional liability of the highest order and recommended his termination in increasingly urgent terms over a decade. But the police union had successfully blocked every disciplinary action through aggressive legal challenges, arguing that Matthews had never been criminally convicted and was being persecuted for effective policing. The union had threatened work slowdowns if Matthews was terminated. His personnel file was thick with complaints from homeowners, diplomats, federal officials, and prominent citizens. One Internal Affairs report from 2 years ago specifically stated, Officer Matthews represents an immediate threat to the department's relationship with the federal government, foreign diplomatic corps, and prominent citizens. His pattern of assuming black residents in exclusive neighborhoods are criminals regardless of evidence has created multiple diplomatic incidents and cost the city millions. He has been counseled, trained, and warned repeatedly with no behavior change. Termination is not just recommended, but urgently necessary. If this officer arrests a high-ranking official, the consequences will be catastrophic. The recommendation was blocked by the union president, who threatened legal action and media campaigns. Matthews remained on patrol in affluent neighborhoods because the system valued labor peace over constitutional rights and public safety. That afternoon, Matthews was patrolling Kalorama when he received multiple calls about suspicious activity. Several neighbors who didn't recognize Judge Washington reported seeing a black man walking around a historic mansion like he owned the place. Matthews arrived with backup, saw Judge Washington in casual clothes examining landscaping, and immediately assumed criminal trespass at a high-value property. Sir, you need to leave this property immediately. Judge Washington turned, confused, seeing multiple officers. Leave? This is my house. I own it. I received multiple reports you're trespassing at this estate. Judge Washington looked at the officers with concern and measured his words carefully. Decades in courtrooms had taught him precision. Trespassing? I live here. I'm standing in my own yard. I'm examining landscaping work that was just completed on my property. This is a historic mansion worth millions. Show me proof you own it. I'm Judge Marcus Washington. I'm a United States District Court judge for the District of Columbia. I was appointed by the president. I purchased this property 5 years ago for $8.5 million. This is my home. There's no way you own this property. Step off now. Judge Washington felt anger rising but kept his judicial composure. There's no way? Officer, I sit on the federal bench. I preside over federal cases. My chambers are at the E. Barrett Prettyman United States Courthouse. I live in this house. Property records are public. My neighbors include senators and ambassadors who can verify my identity. If you can't prove ownership, you're leaving. Now. My identification is inside. My judicial appointment letter is inside. My deed is inside. I stepped outside to inspect my landscaping. I don't carry my credentials when I'm working in my own yard. Should federal judges be arrested at their own mansions? Let me know what you think. A neighbor walking past stopped, a senior State Department official who recognized Judge Washington from diplomatic events. Officer, that's Judge Washington. He's a federal judge. He's lived here for 5 years. I'm Assistant Secretary Henderson from State. I can vouch for him. Matthews ignored him. Sir, keep moving. This is a police matter. Assistant Secretary Henderson didn't move. This is not a police matter. This is a federal judge at his own home. I'm a senior State Department official, and I'm telling you that man is exactly who he says he is. His Honor has presided over cases I've been involved in. He owns this property." Matthews turned back to Judge Washington, his hand moving toward his weapon. "Sir, final warning. Leave this property or you're under arrest." "Under arrest for standing in my own yard?" "Officer, I'm a federal judge. I'm asking you, what crime do you believe I've committed?" "Trespassing on a historic property." "I own the historic property. I'm the owner. This is my estate." Matthews moved toward him. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." "Officer, I'm ordering you to verify with property records before you make a catastrophic mistake. You're under arrest for trespassing and impersonating a federal official." "Impersonating? I am a federal official. I'm a United States District Court judge." Matthews grabbed Judge Washington's arm and forced it behind his back. Judge Washington didn't resist, but spoke with judicial authority. "I am not resisting. I am complying under protest. I am the Honorable Marcus Washington, United States District Court Judge for the District of Columbia. I own this property at 2847 Kalorama Road. I purchased it 5 years ago for $8.5 million. I was appointed to the federal bench by the President of the United States and confirmed by the United States Senate. I'm being unlawfully arrested on my own property. Officer Matthews is arresting a sitting federal judge for standing in his own yard. I have witnesses, including a senior State Department official. This will have serious constitutional implications." Assistant Secretary Henderson was already on his phone calling the Chief of Protocol at State, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and congressional leadership. A federal judge is being arrested at his own home. Judge Marcus Washington. Someone call the Chief Judge. Call the Attorney General. Matthews handcuffed Judge Washington, the metal tight on his wrists that had signed federal court orders, that had sworn in attorneys, that had held the gavel while dispensing justice. He walked him toward his patrol car while Judge Washington continued speaking in his measured judicial voice. "I am a United States District Court judge. I preside over federal cases involving constitutional law. I was appointed by the President. I own this $8.5 million mansion. I live blocks from Supreme Court justices. This officer is arresting me for being black in Kalorama. This arrest violates my Fourth Amendment rights and represents an assault on the federal judiciary. I have multiple witnesses. This is being documented." More neighbors were emerging now, several recognizing Judge Washington immediately, a senator, an ambassador, 2 federal appellate judges who lived nearby. "That's Judge Washington," the senator shouted. "He's a federal judge." One of the appellate judges called out. "This is outrageous," the ambassador yelled. Multiple neighbors were on phones calling the chief judge, the attorney general, congressional leaders, the media. A federal judge being arrested at his own home was unprecedented. Matthews placed Judge Washington in the back of his patrol car. Through the window, Judge Washington could see his mansion, the property he'd lovingly restored, where he'd hosted judicial conferences, where he'd written opinions that protected civil rights. He could see neighbors gathering, powerful people who could verify his identity but whom Matthews had ignored. He'd spent his career fighting for justice. Now he was a victim of the injustice he'd spent decades combating in his courtroom. The drive to the station took 38 minutes through D.C. traffic. Judge Washington spent it thinking about the constitutional implications, the precedent this would set, the lawsuit he would have to file, the congressional hearings that would follow, the national crisis this would create. They arrived at MPD's 2nd District Station. Matthews walked him inside, still handcuffed, past a desk sergeant who looked up and immediately went pale with recognition. "Judge Washington? From the federal court?" Judge Washington spoke before Matthews could. "Yes, Sergeant. I'm the Honorable Marcus Washington, United States District Court Judge for the District of Columbia. That's my mansion in Kalorama. I own it. I purchased it 5 years ago for $8.5 million. I was inspecting landscaping work in my own yard when Officer Matthews arrested me for trespassing on my own property and impersonating a federal official. Despite being a sitting federal judge appointed by the President of the United States, D.C. property records will show Marcus Washington as owner since 2019. My neighbors, including a senator, ambassadors, and federal appellate judges, vouched for me. Officer Matthews ignored all of them. This is my home." The desk sergeant's hands were shaking as he reached for the phone. "Sir, Your Honor, this is Matthews. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Within minutes, the station erupted in chaos. The chief judge of the D.C. District Court was on the phone demanding immediate release. The U.S. attorney was calling. The attorney general's office was calling. The mayor was calling. Congressional leaders were calling. The deputy chief rushed in, then the chief of police, then the deputy mayor. Within an hour, the chief judge arrived personally with federal marshals. The story was already breaking nationally. Federal judge arrested at own home. The chief of police approached Judge Washington, still handcuffed, and removed them personally, his face showing genuine horror. "Your Honor, I cannot express. This is unconscionable. You're being released immediately. This should never have happened. This is a constitutional crisis." He turned to Matthews with fury and fear. "You arrested a sitting federal judge at his own mansion, a federal judge appointed by the president. You accused him of impersonating a federal official when he is a federal official. You ignored a State Department assistant secretary, a senator, and federal appellate judges who vouched for him. You've created a constitutional incident, badge and weapon. You're suspended immediately pending termination and federal prosecution." Matthews went pale. "Chief, I was responding to calls." "You arrested a federal judge at his own mansion for standing in his own yard. You've generated 43 complaints in 21 years. Congress wrote letters about you. The Post did an investigative series. We tried to fire you 10 years ago. The union blocked it. Now you've arrested a federal judge. Federal charges are coming. Your career is over. Badge, weapon, now." By that evening, the story had exploded nationally and internationally. Every media outlet led with it. Federal judge arrested at own mansion. The legal community was in shock. Federal judges across the country issued statements. The judiciary expressed outrage. Congress announced immediate hearings. The Attorney General ordered a DOJ investigation. Civil rights organizations mobilized. Constitutional scholars called it one of the most serious civil rights violations involving a federal official in modern history. Judge Washington held a press conference the next day, his judicial composure intact but his message powerful. "I'm a federal judge. I've dedicated my life to the law, to justice, to protecting constitutional rights. Yesterday I was arrested at my own home, a mansion I purchased with money I earned through decades of legal work. Officer Matthews saw a black man in a yard and couldn't conceive that I might own the property, even when neighbors, including a senator and federal judges, told him I was exactly who I claimed to be. Even when a State Department official vouched for me. He arrested a sitting federal judge for being black in Kalorama." He paused, his voice taking on the authority of the bench. 43 complaints over 21 years, 38 involving black people at luxury properties. Internal Affairs recommended his termination repeatedly. Congress demanded action. The union blocked it. The system protected him for 2 decades, and I paid the price. But this isn't just about me. This is about every black person in America who's been told they don't belong somewhere they have every right to be. The difference is I have a platform, resources, and the authority of the federal bench. Most victims don't. Judge Washington filed a comprehensive federal lawsuit 14 months later against Officer Robert Matthews, his supervisors who'd ignored 43 complaints, D.C. Metropolitan Police, and the District of Columbia. The allegations were historic. Unlawful arrest of a federal judicial officer, false imprisonment of a sitting federal judge, violation of judicial immunity, violation of Fourth Amendment rights, racial profiling and discrimination, interference with federal judicial operations, assault on the federal judiciary, separation of powers violation, deliberate indifference to Matthews's pattern despite congressional and media attention, punitive damages for arresting a federal judge, violation of his rights under 42 U.S.C., prior of 1983, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, official misconduct, and constitutional violations of the highest order. The complaint included Matthews's complete record, 43 complaints over 21 years, 38 involving black people at luxury properties, 10 termination recommendations over a decade, all blocked by the union, congressional letters demanding action, a Washington Post investigative series documenting his pattern, internal affairs reports warning of catastrophic consequences, and evidence of a system that protected him despite knowing he was a severe liability. The District of Columbia's attorneys found the case legally and politically indefensible. The defendant was a sitting federal judge. Property records proved ownership of an $8.5 million mansion. Multiple high-ranking witnesses, including federal judges, a senator, and a State Department official, had vouched for him at the scene. Matthews had ignored all evidence and arrested a federal judicial officer. The pattern showed deliberate indifference at the highest levels despite extraordinary warnings. The constitutional implications were staggering. The political pressure was immense. Congress was holding hearings. The federal judiciary was demanding accountability. The district settled 28 months later in the largest civil rights settlement in D.C. history and one of the largest in American history. $21 million paid to the Honorable Marcus Washington, reflecting not just the violation of his rights, but the assault on the federal judiciary and the separation of powers. Officer Robert Matthews was terminated immediately and faced multiple federal criminal charges, including deprivation of rights under color of law against a federal official, obstruction of justice, interference with federal judicial operations, and assault on a federal officer. He was convicted on all counts and received 84 months in federal prison, 7 years, one of the longest sentences ever for a police officer. His name entered the National Decertification Index with permanent notation of his conviction for crimes against a federal judge. Judge Washington testified before Congress at historic hearings on police accountability and racial profiling. "I sit on the federal bench. I interpret the Constitution. I protect civil rights from my courtroom. And I was arrested at my own home for being black." Officer Matthews had 43 complaints over 21 years. Internal Affairs warned of catastrophic consequences. Congress wrote letters. The media exposed the pattern. The union blocked every termination attempt. The system chose union solidarity over constitutional rights, over public safety, over the integrity of the federal judiciary. And that system cost the taxpayers of Washington, D.C. $21 million. He continued with judicial gravity. But this isn't just about money. This is about whether we have the courage to remove officers with documented patterns of abuse, whether we value civil rights or union contracts, whether a black federal judge can stand in his own yard without being treated as a criminal. The $21 million settlement sends a message. But the real question is, will we finally change the systems that enabled Officer Matthews for 2 decades? Washington, D.C. and the federal government implemented unprecedented reforms. Mandatory verification before any arrest at private residences, automatic termination at 3 similar complaints, regardless of union appeals, elimination of union protections for officers with documented patterns, federal legislation protecting federal officials from local harassment, congressional oversight of police interactions with federal property, the Judicial Protection Act, and criminal referrals for officers who ignore judicial identification. Matthews is in federal prison. D.C. paid $21 million, but that came after 43 complaints, 21 years of warnings, congressional intervention, media exposés, and a system that protected him until he arrested someone the system couldn't ignore, a federal judge. The case became required reading in law schools nationwide as an example of systemic failure and judicial courage. Judge Washington continues to serve on the federal bench, writing opinions that cite his own arrest as evidence of ongoing racial profiling. Comment if arresting federal judges should carry mandatory 10-year federal sentences. Comment if union protections should be void after 3 civil rights complaints. And if these stories matter, hit that subscribe button. This isn't about one officer or one judge. It's about systems that protect documented patterns of abuse while destroying constitutional rights, systems so broken that even a federal judge appointed by the president isn't safe in his own yard.